DJ and PK, it's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. We're joined now by Matt Brown from the Extra Points newsletter. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good morning, fellas. Thanks for having me.
Matt, it was a big weekend here as everybody saw stuff on Cougar Board and then saw a BYU official actually put something on Cougar Board, which is shocking. Cougar Board's been around for 25 years, to dispel the rumors and say the AD's still in place, knock it off, quiet down. And we realized this story, then news travels, and now it's become a story nationally. And I think we're all curious how it's hitting as people around the country find out about this. So, Matt, you're right here with us. How's it hitting? How's it landing?
How's it hitting? I think once you get outside of the state of Utah, the more interesting thing to people is, wow, BYU's posted on Cougar Board now, rather than, BYU's athletic director may or may not be in trouble / may or may not be being terminated soon. Once we get into fall camp season, where we are right now, I could tell you as someone whose entire career is writing about things like athletic directors hiring or being fired, most fans don't care about that as much. I understand why it's a big story here locally, especially given Kalani's comments a couple of days ago, given BYU's new hire of an experienced, potential quasi-AD from Kentucky. I understand there's a lot of questions, but the biggest national thing is, this is something you don't see every day, and this is a very specifically chosen worded statement. Things that make you go, I know that radio is a visual medium and everything, but I'm making the Brian Windhorst face right now as we're talking. Just why would they do that? Interesting.
Yeah, I think that the timing of it all is something that I think Kalani chose to do it. He went on Ben Kirtle's show and said what he said, and I think it was on purpose. I think it, in his mind, it was time to say that, and I spent probably 4 hours on the thing yesterday. Wrote a piece for KSL.com that they published overnight. It's up now, and the idea of money not coming, promises not being kept, and then being redirected to basketball, all that stuff, that's all in there. What do you think the fallout could be? Or maybe a lesser word would be ramifications.
Yeah, this is an interesting kind of place and market, right? Because at most of the country, not everywhere, but most of the country, when you have a battle between an enormously popular, successful, and recently extended head football coach and an athletic director or a senior administration official who hasn't been there that long, the coach wins 9 out of 10 times. Part of the job of being an AD is the very difficult task of telling a respected and coach who makes 6 times what you make, tell that person no. And there's tensions there. We can look at Utah for that. We can look at Kentucky for that. We can look at Michigan and lots of other places where those things happen. I have followed this program enough and been doing this beat long enough to know that BYU is not the kind of place where they're going to let they're going to terminate an AD, less than 2 years into that person's tenure, right. Especially because there's so few people in this industry that have the administrative experience and the temple recommend that you can't just fly through those people. You're not going to terminate someone so early in their tenure unless you have an extremely good reason. So what ends up happening is you kind of, I don't want to say passive aggressively, but there are political ways to make your frustrations known, and how Kalani phrased things is one way to do that. And then that you end up with some meetings and you yell at each other in the meetings, and then you figure it out and you move on. And in 2 months, if BYU's winning football games, nobody will remember this but nerds like us. If this was at Ohio State or Texas, things could turn out a little bit differently, for good or for ill, because this is a different kind of market and more private, and even among private schools. I would be surprised if this is still a talking point in mid-October. If it is, something's gone terribly wrong in Provo.
That's an interesting point about is something gone terribly wrong, because to your point, these kinds of things happen in lots of athletic departments, but how far does it go before it gets resolved? And there's a thought here. Is football cannibalizing the rest of the department? Are we just at a point where financially it should be, because the whole department and what league you're in rests on how good you are in football? how is this playing out? Are you seeing these kind of battles between football and basketball in other sports, especially at the schools where basketball is more of a priority?
If we're being honest, the number of schools where basketball is legitimately more of a priority than football in FBS, we can count on one hand. Even at places with enormously popular and significant basketball traditions, like Kansas and North Carolina, when your job is the financial bean counter and you look at where the public attention comes from, it's still football. Football will always need more resources, even if you are a quote unquote like basketball institution, because your basketball roster has 15 guys, right? You've got 4 assistants, and you might have, we can throw in some GAs and a GM and a Dobo and everything else. You're looking at like a total staff of 30 people. And that's football is going to be 6 times that, just in terms of roster size and everything that you need administratively, which it kind of seemed like Kalani was getting at a little bit more, rather than just, oh my God, I need more money to pay my tight end. It's we're running a business here, and we don't want people having 4 or 5 different administrative jobs, and folks have that in other schools in this conference. With the tension, though, between football and basketball, and for that matter, between football and every other sport, that's a constant almost everywhere. It requires any truly enormous amount of money and uncommonly strong hires to be good at everything. Most of the schools that are really, really good at football are not as consistently really, really good in men's basketball. And the ones that are, places like Alabama, places like Florida, places like Michigan, are playing in a different financial stratosphere than where BYU is playing. All that's to say, though, I don't think I know enough as some doofus in Chicago to say the problem with BYU administratively right now is basketball. I don't think we have enough information to necessarily say that. I get why that's like the popular narrative. This could just be a failure to communicate.
I think part of the issue here is that there's a lot of hands involved. It's not a coach, athletic director, it's athletic director and then folks above him. And sure. BYU is trying to navigate this world of the mission of the university, obviously educating the students, but also the connection to the Latter-day Saint Church. It's direct, right? We all know that, and there's really no point in arguing about it, what have you. But in talking with some of the people, the idea is it needs to be run more like a business, and where do you get the biggest return on the investment? So BYU doesn't want to be seen as a sports factory and a football factory, but at the same time, they say they want to win at the highest levels, which requires the types of commitment probably that we're going to see from Texas Tech and have been seeing. So they have to come to some type of acceptance of that. And I think that's part of the issue, as it's a little bit of a struggle for them, given the fact that they are a religious institution, and we understand and respect that, but at the same time trying to win and how they balance that. I think that's part of the issue here.
You may very well be right. You guys being local are always going to have a probably a more clear perspective on this. I've written about this before. We might have even talked about it. Broadly speaking, there's an uncomfortable culture shift, because in my experience growing up in the LDS church and being around the LDS church and covering BYU and covering college sports for so long, for most of my life, the common perception was you don't work for BYU or any LDS affiliated enterprise for the money. You're not going to get paid the highest rate if you're a German professor or a software engineer or a basketball coach, because they want people that want to be there for the mission, right? Like, you're still going to get paid, but they don't want people to be in Provo just for the money. And there's positives and negatives to that philosophy, but I understand it and I grew up with it. And that doesn't work in football or basketball or college sports right now. And to either BYU's credit or BYU's detriment when it comes to coaching and when it comes to paying for athletic talent, that mindset has shifted. But if I'm a 72-year-old dude in Sandy, I can understand why you might look at this and think, oh my gosh, the world has changed, BYU and the church has changed, and I'm uncomfortable with it. And some of those people have administrative, ecclesiastical, or political power, and I get how that's a difficult thing to navigate, and I can't possibly say from my perspective what the right decision is, right? Because the stakeholders here and what you want, it's different from Notre Dame and different from everyone else. The other thing I think I'll quickly add that's important, I think, in these kind of dynamics, and that it's different from the last 5 or 6 years. When you say, hey, BYU athletics needs to run a little bit more like a business, or big-time college sports needs to run more like a business, and that's true everywhere. And when that happens is now you have a new group of stakeholders that have more power and influence than maybe they did a decade ago, and those are major donors. Are now they're quasi-investors. We would not have been having the conversation about the proverbial cookie man the way that we did, last year in this new era. And so if you're a senior administrator at a place like BYU, you got to manage the suits in Salt Lake. You got to manage the suits elsewhere on campus, and you got to manage the people now that are giving you 6, sometimes 7 figures and wanting influence. And you need those people more than maybe you did 15 years ago when there wasn't an athletic payroll. And that's not an easy political job.
Right.
Matt Brown joining us, Extra Points newsletter. Maybe this all gets worked out. He gets the money, and like you said, it's this is a footnote as the games are being played. But if he doesn't, and if he's frustrated and he doesn't see it getting better and he wants to take a job somewhere else, he passed on Penn State. What do you think the appetite would be for Kalani if USC or Oklahoma or Texas or some other big-time job comes up?
Yeah, this should be a relatively active year. I think in the coaching carousel, I expect there to be other Big Ten and Big 12 jobs that are going to open up this cycle. We know there's a couple of folks in the SEC that are going to have significant pressure on them, even though this was a big cycle in that conference. And he'd be one of the better coaches on the market, especially if BYU lives up to their preseason projections here and contends for a Big 12 championship. I don't know whether they're going to win or if they're going to finish third, or because the difference between first and eighth in this conference is so small. But yeah, he would be an attractive person for somebody like a USC if that opened up. It's going to be expensive for someone to pry him out of Provo, and I understand all of the other reasons why he might want to stay. But yeah, if he's actually mad, and if you promised that, and I'm saying it because I don't know this, I'm not reporting it, but if he was promised something and if he didn't get it, like any other employee who is desirable on the market, yeah, you're at risk of alienating or losing that person. And that happens in college sports sometimes. It happens with players every year.
You say you're in the Midwest, so I got something that is in your wheelhouse. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about this, and it was involving Kyle Whittingham saying about the question became about the hate of Ohio State, right? And I've got extended family in the Michigan area. My mother-in-law is from there and been back there, and it's my wife's family, not mine, but I've spoken to him many times. And you got to hate Ohio State. And I came back and I said, I don't think it's a big deal that Kyle didn't come out, I hate those you-know-whats. But I said that I thought it was going to be a story. And sure enough, when he gets back into town, they ask him about it, and he responds, well, if I hate him more, is that going to help us win? I mean, so I thought it was a great response, but I knew it would be a story. Even though it's not a big story, it's kind of a funny off-the-wall story. What do you think of it?
It's so funny. They're still talking about this here.
Yeah.
And I actually think I was hoping somebody would ask you about this when I was doing radio in this market, because I think there's some important differences between the Holy War rivalry and Ohio State, Michigan. I'm from Columbus. I live in Chicago now. I went to Ohio State. I know that rivalry very, very well. And I've been trying to explain to people here locally, of course, Kyle would say that. He's a BYU grad that coached at Utah and is great friends with BYU's head coach. And that rivalry, BYU-Utah, is different from Ohio State-Michigan, because unless you live in Toledo, you don't live on top of Michigan fans or Ohio State fans in this area. You're not as likely to have somebody at church who roots for the other team, or a boss, or necessarily a neighbor. It's much more homogenous. And if you're in Salt Lake or anywhere, within these two schools, you're going to have every element of your social circle is going to have people from both fan bases. So you can't hate them the same way. You want to beat them. It dominates your recruiting. You'll get fired if you don't win. But you have to live with these people in a way that you don't with Ohio State, Michigan. The difference in OSU, Michigan is that, like, on the field and financially and culturally and structurally, that game's more important because that's usually for a conference title, national title implications. BYU, Utah is usually not going to be for playoff spots or anything. That might change in the future, but historically that hasn't been the case. But I think Kyle's exactly right. And I think there's a learning curve here on both sides, because the cultural differences between his previous employment and jobs and where he is now are significant. But anybody who's close friends with Urban Meyer is going to understand the importance of the Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. It's not like Kyle doesn't want to win that game.
So Ryan Day leaves Ohio State and Kalani ends up there. How weird would that be? If you're just going to play out hypotheticals, how weird would that be? It would be
it would be so weird, and I think as someone in my position, that would be a thing I think I'd have to write a book about, right? Like I would suddenly be a very popular national radio guest if Kalani comes to Columbus. I don't know how much you'd like it, right? I mean, things have changed since I lived there, but I can't recall too many other Polynesian brothers and sisters in the 614 area code, but I guess there weren't that many in State College either.
Well, Matt, we appreciate the time. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for giving us a little national perspective to the story of the weekend.
Of course. All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
Matt Brown, you can check him out with his Extra Points newsletter, hip deep in college football and college sports. DJ and PK, it's 97.5, the KSL Sports Zone. The question of the day is coming up at the top of the hour. It's a Win Tickets Wednesday. We'll give the concert tickets away in the 8 o'clock hour. Stay with us right here on The Zone.